I'm going to ask everybody to stand by for just a minute because I am hearing this and I'm going to tell you about it now. We have some breaking news that is just coming in. This is being reported at this moment by the Washington Post. They report this, quote, at least 4 national security officials were so alarmed by the Trump administration's attempts to pressure Ukraine for political purposes that they raised concerns with a White House lawyer both before and immediately after President Trump's July 25th call with that country's president. Again, this being reported right now by the Washington Post. They also report this, quote, the nature and timing of the previously undisclosed discussions indicate that officials were delivering warnings through official White House channels earlier than previously understood. And we have Greg Jaffe, who has reported this, is joining us on the phone. I'm sorry, I'm just being told this through my ear and trying to convey it. Greg, thank you for joining us on short notice. We just read sort of the headline findings from your story here, but essentially you are learning and you're telling us more people than we realized raised concerns about this call.
Yeah, that's right. Concern had been percolating for a while. It among some prior to the call, and then immediately after it, kind of a flare goes up, and there's kind of significant worry. And some folks go immediately to John Eisenberg, who's the National Security Council lawyer, to register their concerns about what had happened on the call and the direction of sort of Ukraine policy.
And as they registered their concerns, did anything happen then?
You know, it's not clear. Eisenberg, from one of our sources, gave the indication he took it seriously and would elevate it. But beyond that, we don't know what happened.
Is it your sense that, because obviously the president, and we know this, other transcripts had leaked out in the past, but that the president's had calls in the past with foreign leaders that maybe were a little unorthodox, but is it your sense that this was, in terms of just the alarm bells that were being sort of set off here and registered, that this was unique in that sense?
Yeah, this was different. I think, there have been calls that are outrageous, that are calls that are surprising, that cause people to roll eyes. I think what was different here is people heard something that they thought was potentially illegal.
Congressman Garamendi, I know you're still with us, I hope you've been following along. I'm just curious, This is, we're all processing this, I assume you are, but what is your reaction to this news?
Well, we know exactly what happened. What happened was a cover-up. The tapes of the transcriptions went into a deep vault. We know that people began to scramble to cover up what is apparently an illegal action by the president with regard to the campaign financing laws, as well as perhaps other laws dealing with bribery in a foreign country. And so what did they do? They did a cover-up. Now, who did it? That's why we need the subpoenas. That's why we need the president to come forth, to end his stonewalling, to allow people to do what they must do, and that is to testify before Congress, get the facts out there, and we'll see where it goes. We always know, always been said forever, it's the cover-up that gets you in trouble, and we know from all the information that has thus far been forthcoming that there was at least a cover-up here and quite possibly in other places.
And Greg, I just want to make sure clear on the details here. The folks who raised concerns, who expressed concerns, who you are reporting on, these are people who were on the call? These are people who heard about the call?
Yeah, it was a combination of both people who were on the call or listening into the call and people who had heard about it within the White House, so the immediate kind of National Security Council staff.
And for folks who aren't familiar with how the different sort of facets of the bureaucracy sort of interact here, the people you're describing, would these be national security professionals who are sort of in place no matter who the president is, no matter which party controls the White House, or are these political appointees you're talking about here?
It's actually a mix of both political appointees and career officials.
It's both. And in terms, I say, in terms of what they expressed here, did they make written statements? Are there records that might come out pertaining to this at all?
Yeah, I don't know. My understanding is that from our reporting is that they went to the NSC lawyer and did not provide written statements, but expressed concerns verbally. Now, as to whether Mr. Eisenberg took notes or typed up a report, that we don't know.
Greg Jaffe, thank you for taking a few minutes. I know this is probably a lot of demand for you right now, but again, you just reported this breaking news piece in the Washington Post. Thank you for taking a few minutes. We appreciate it. Mika Owyang, I want to get you in here, just your reaction as well.
Yeah, I think that both of these stories, what they really indicate is that it's very clear that the president's actions are illegal, and the White House has known it for quite some time. You don't go through the effort to hide this transcript in the deep, dark vault after all of these officials express alarm if you don't think that you've done something wrong. And what the DOJ indictments today, unsealed today, show you is that foreign campaign contributions are a crime. This was far from a perfect call. The president, it's not. He's done something very seriously wrong here. He can't say that this is nothing and this is business as usual. The Department of Justice considers this kind of activity a crime, and they've been trying to hide it.
Steve, if I could just
Ken, go ahead,
the context here and the timeline so our viewers can understand where the whistleblower fits into this, as I understand it. So the Post is reporting that these 4 officials raised questions, some before and then some after the July 25th Ukraine call. And then at some point later, that transcript of that call was put into a highly classified system at the White House. And then a little bit after that, some of these officials who had heard the call directly went to the whistleblower, who is a CIA officer and at that time was back at the CIA, had worked in the White House and knew these people. And then that whistleblower began gathering these accounts and went to the CIA lawyers, the CIA general counsel, who then called John Eisenberg, the man that Greg Jaffe mentioned, the top lawyer at the National Security Council, and said, hey, we have a problem with this call. People are raising questions about this call with Ukraine. Well, Eisenberg, of course, knew exactly which call she was talking about because he had already had these previous complaints. Then they went and gathered information. At that point, the CIA general counsel made what she considered a criminal referral to the Justice Department about that call, and then sometime later the whistleblower complaint came in. That's the timeline, Steve.
That's great context. Thank you, Ken, for providing that. Let me one more question to you, Ken, as well. I want to return to the story we led with there, because one more piece of it that's getting a lot of attention tonight. Obviously, you mentioned all of the connections to Giuliani. Giuliani not included in this indictment today. Again, this is a campaign finance indictment. There's all sorts of speculation. Do you have any reporting? Do you have any sense if prosecutors are interested in Giuliani at all ultimately here?
There are reports out there, Steve, that we have not confirmed. The word we're getting is, of course, there is scrutiny of Rudy Giuliani as a part of this inquiry. He had relationships with these people who are now under indictment. He was working with them very closely in some very controversial matters. So there is scrutiny. There's nothing to suggest that he's a target of an investigation. He's not saying very much today. But certainly when I talk to my congressional sources, that is where their attention is focused here, is the question of what was Rudy Giuliani's role in the political contributions made by these men, in the business deals that they were trying to arrange in Ukraine. What did Rudy know? Who was paying for Rudy's trip to Ukraine? Because after all, what Rudy was doing is at the heart of the impeachment inquiry, which is charging that Donald Trump abused his power to pressure the Ukrainian government. He was doing that in part through Rudy Giuliani, Steve.
Okay. Ken Dilanian, Congressman John Garamendi, Mika Owyang, thank you all for being with us. Thank you for rolling with us as well through that breaking news. Appreciate the time.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.